Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of absolute uncompromising precision.
Right, yeah, like engineering.
Exactly. It's like engineering. You fall off a ladder, you break your arm, and the X-ray shows that jagged white line.
On a black background,
Mhm.
yeah. It's binary.
Yeah, the doctor just points at it and says, there it is, broken or not broken.
It's clean. And honestly, it's comforting.
It really is. We like things to be visible. We like human health to be something we can measure and just put into a neat little box.
With a very specific treatment plan attached to it.
Right. But the reality is that human health, and specifically human behavior regarding health, it almost never fits into a neat little box.
No, not at all. Because the moment you step outside that emergency room into the world of, say, behavioral science or societal health.
Or like neurodevelopment or trauma.
Exactly. Suddenly that X-ray machine is completely useless. I mean, you can't take an X-ray of a cultural taboo,
No, you really can't. We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is entirely murky.
It's the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters.
Yeah, because you can't draw blood to measure someone's lived experience, right?
No. Or a community's historical distrust of vaccines. You can't put that under a microscope.
Which brings us perfectly to our mission for you today. Welcome to a highly customized deep dive.
We have a great one today.
We really do. Today, we are targeting a very specific, extremely valuable piece of knowledge. We have this incredible source text to guide us.
It's Lecture 9, right?
Yes. Lecture 9, Qualitative Research Methods. An overview. This is drawn directly from the basic course in biomedical research.
And we've got a comprehensive set of, 30 core principles and scenarios?
30 multiple choice questions, yeah, from Dr. Amit M. Shah's review notes sitting right here in front of us.
But we're definitely not going to treat this like a dry academic syllabus.
Oh, absolutely not. We're going to explore these 30 concepts as like a masterclass in how to actually study human beings.
Because if quantitative research, the numbers, the surveys, the statistics, if that tells us how many people are doing something,
then qualitative research tells us why they are doing it.
Exactly, the why.
And understanding that why is really the only way to actually solve complex human problems.
I completely agree.
So what we're going to do is pose these fundamental questions, these scenarios from the notes, and then we're going to debate and decode the correct methodologies.
We'll explore why certain approaches are, frankly, absolutely brilliant and why others will just completely ruin your data.
Yeah, we're going to translate all this academic theory into the messy, complicated reality of actual fieldwork.
Just settle in.
Yeah, whether you're designing your own study or trying to make sense of medical literature, or you're just insanely curious about how scientists make sense of human behavior, this deep dive is for you.
Let's do it.
Let's jump into section 1. I like to call this the paradigm shift.
Yeah.
What is qualitative research?
A very necessary shift, yeah.
Right, because before we can look at how to do the research, we need to understand what it is. And frankly, why it often terrifies traditional scientists.
Terrifies is really the right word. It requires a total paradigm shift.
Why do you think that is?
Well, most of us are taught from a very young age that science means objectivity.
Right, hard numbers.
Exactly. Hard numbers, detached observation, rigorously testing a hypothesis. Qualitative research asks you to just temporarily suspend almost all of that.
Okay, let's start with the absolute basics then, directly from the foundational scenarios in our source material.
Question 11, I think.
Yep. If we are trying to define the core characteristics of qualitative research methods, a quantitative mind looks for words like objective or measurable.
Or repeatable, yeah.
Right. But if we want to accurately describe qualitative research, what are the actual characteristics we must embrace?
The defining characteristics are that it is subjective, credible, inductive, and it relies heavily on the interpretation of responses.
Okay, I have to stop you right there and push back a little.
Go for it.
Because I can hear the hard scientists screaming right now. Subjective.
I know.
In almost any other scientific discipline, the word subjective is basically an insult.
It implies bias.
Right. It implies a lack of rigor. If our data is subjective, isn't it just a glorified diary entry? How does a scientist justify subjectivity?
That is honestly the most common hurdle people face when entering this field.
I believe it.
In a laboratory, sure, subjectivity is a contaminant. You don't want the chemist's personal feelings to influence the reaction in the beaker.
Obviously not.
But in qualitative research, the human experience is the beaker.
Oh, if that's a great way to put it.
Right. Subjectivity is not a flaw. It is the entire point of the study. You are actively seeking the subjective, lived experience of the participant.
Can you give me a concrete example of that?
Let's say you're studying patients with chronic unexplained pain.
Okay.
A quantitative researcher wants objective data, like rate your pain on a scale of 1 to 10. Or, how many milligrams of ibuprofen did you take today?
Which is useful data.
It's very useful, but it misses the human reality. The qualitative researcher sits down and asks, what does this pain feel like? And how has it changed your relationship with your family?
Wow. Yeah.
The answer to that is entirely subjective. It is their personal truth. You can't measure it with a ruler, but it is scientifically vital for understanding the holistic impact of the disease.
Which perfectly explains the second word in that correct framework. Credible.
Exactly. It replaces the quantitative word measurable.
Because we aren't measuring their emotional pain, we are establishing the credibility of their experience.
Yeah.
But then we hit the third word, which is a massive philosophical shift.
Inductive.
Inductive versus deductive, yeah.
Qualitative research is inductive, whereas quantitative research is deductive. I always struggle to keep those straight, honestly.
It's tricky.
Until I started thinking about it like a police investigation.
The detective analogy is perfect for this. Walk us through it.
Okay, so deductive reasoning, the quantitative way, is when you walk into a crime scene already convinced that the butler did it. You have your hypothesis locked in.
Exactly. Your entire investigation is just looking for specific measurements to prove or disprove that theory.
Are the butler's fingerprints on the candlestick, yes or no?
Right. Does the footprint match the butler's shoe? Yes or no? You are testing a pre-existing idea.
You are deducing the conclusion from a set premise.
But inductive reasoning, which is the hallmark of qualitative research, is like walking into that exact same crime scene with a totally blank slate.
Zero preconceived theories.
Zero. You just start gathering clues, you look at the broken glass, you listen to the witnesses, you notice the smell of cigar smoke.
And you slowly build the story.
Yeah, you build the theory from the ground up, based strictly on the raw data you're finding. You are generating the theory, not testing it.
And that requires an incredible amount of intellectual humility.
It really does.
You have to admit that you don't know the answer before you start, which ties directly into another core principle we need to establish from the notes.
Question 17, right?
Yeah. Yes. If we consider the viewpoint of the researcher versus the participant, is it true that in qualitative research, researchers must interpret the social reality from the participant's point of view?
I mean, based on the blank slate idea, the answer has to be true.
Unequivocally true. You cannot look at your participants like bugs under a microscope.
Maintaining that clinical, detached observation.
Right. If you do that, you're applying an external framework to their internal lives. You have to try and see the world through their specific cultural and personal lens.
Let's apply this to a real-world crisis. Imagine a tightly knit community suddenly refuses a new, highly effective life-saving vaccine.
Okay.
A purely quantitative, detached observer might look at the data and say, well, these people are uneducated, or they're irrational, because the math proves the vaccine is safe.
They judge the reality from the laboratory's point of view.
And by doing so, they completely fail to solve the problem.
Because they're not listening. The qualitative researcher walks into that community, sits down, and asks, what does this vaccine represent to you? And they might discover a deeply rooted historical trauma regarding government medical interventions, or a specific religious interpretation.
The researcher interprets the reality from the participant's viewpoint.
Even if that viewpoint completely contradicts established medical science, it is their social reality, and you have to understand it to address it.
That makes total sense. If you don't understand their reality, you can never hope to communicate with them effectively. You'll just be shouting statistics at a brick wall.
Exactly.
So we've established what qualitative research is: subjective, credible, inductive, and participant-focused. Now, we need to talk about its absolute limits.
Oh, this is important.
Because Dr. Shah's notes hit this point really hard. We have two distinct scenarios, questions 13 and 22, that basically teach the exact same unbreakable rule.
This is where researchers often get themselves into a lot of trouble.
Let's look at the first scenario. A researcher is designing a study and looking at the utility of qualitative research. They know it can provide deep insight, it can help understand quantitative results, it can even help develop better questionnaires, but what is absolutely not a utility of qualitative research.
You cannot use qualitative research to estimate the prevalence of a disease. It is mathematically impossible.
And the second scenario in the notes backs this up from a different angle.
Mm.
Even if you were seeking an in-depth understanding, what is the one thing that cannot be done using qualitative research?
Estimating the burden of a disease. Prevalence and burden are hard boundaries. Qualitative research does not do math.
I actually want to push back on this because I can imagine a stubborn grad student arguing this point.
Let's hear it.
Let's say I have limitless funding. I go into a mid-sized city and I conduct 50 incredibly detailed, immersive 3-hour interviews with individuals suffering from severe migraines.
Okay, huge qualitative study.
Huge. I gather hundreds of pages of data. I know everything about their lives. Why can't I take those 50 interviews and write a paper estimating the burden of migraines in that city? I have so much data.
Because the depth of your data does not equal the breadth of your sample.
Okay, unpack that.
Prevalence and burden are epidemiological concepts. To calculate prevalence, which is the proportion of a population affected by a condition at a specific time, you need statistical representation.
And so random sampling.
Yes. You need a massive randomized sample size so you can confidently say your sample accurately reflects the demographics of the entire city.
You need a numerator and a denominator.
Precisely. In qualitative research, you are intentionally using small, non-representative, purposive samples.
Right, I chose those 50 people specifically.
Exactly, because they had deep, complex stories to tell. Their experiences are profound. But mathematically, you cannot extrapolate the subjective experiences of 50 chosen people to say, therefore, 15% of this city's entire population suffers from this specific burden.
It's like trying to use a thermometer to measure how heavy something is.
Oh, that's good.
Right. The thermometer is a great tool. It gives you highly accurate data about temperature, but it's fundamentally the wrong tool for measuring weight. Qualitative research measures the depth of the experience, not the spread of the disease.
That is a perfect analogy. You must respect the limits of the tool.
Which naturally leads us to the next cluster of concepts, questions 2, 6, and 21. When exactly do we pull this tool out of the toolbox?
Right.
If it can't give us prevalence or burden, what is its primary function? Let's say we need a study design that acts as a tool to generate brand new ideas or hypotheses. What do we use?
You use a qualitative study. It is the engine of hypothesis generation.
And just to be absolutely clear on the reverse of that, is we're looking at characteristics related to qualitative data, which is definitely not the goal.
Hypothesis testing is never the goal of qualitative research.
Generating, not testing. We're back to our detective analogy.
Yeah.
The detective uses qualitative clues to generate the hypothesis that the butler did it. But they need hard quantitative forensics like DNA testing to actually test that hypothesis in court.
Exactly, and this leads to a vital scenario about when not to use qualitative methods.
Question 6.
Right. Let's say you're evaluating different situations. You can use qualitative methods for exploring complex behaviors or understanding cultural shifts. But what is the one situation where qualitative methods are basically useless?
When you are dealing with a familiar and sufficiently researched matter.
Right. Why do we do research at all? We do it to illuminate the unknown.
Makes sense.
If a subject is already deeply familiar and sufficiently researched, let's say the physiological mechanism of how aspirin reduces a fever, we don't need qualitative research.
Because we already have the objective fact.
We don't need to ask an aspirin molecule about its lived experience.
That would be a weird interview.
Very weird.
So, qualitative research is the vanguard. It's the scout you send into the dark forest before you build the road. You use it when you are facing the truly unknown. Let's go back to our hypothetical rural community. If a well-funded, previously successful maternal health program suddenly fails in that village, and the quantitative data just shows a huge drop in clinic attendance,
You have no idea why. It's an unfamiliar problem.
that is the exact moment you deploy qualitative methods. You go in to explore, to listen, to generate ideas about why the failure is happening. You build the theory.
And maybe you discover it's because the clinic changed its hours, conflicting with the local harvest season.
You generated that hypothesis qualitatively.
But then, to prove it on a larger scale, you design a quantitative survey to test that hypothesis across 50 other villages.
Qualitative is your starting line. Quantitative is your finish line.
Beautifully said.
To summarize our paradigm shift, qualitative research is subjective, inductive, and views the world fiercely through the participant's eyes.
Right.
It is brilliant for generating hypotheses in murky territory, but it is fundamentally incapable of testing those hypotheses or doing epidemiological math.
That is the bedrock. If you understand those limits and strengths, everything else falls into place.
Okay, let's turn the page to section 2, the interviewer's arsenal. We know what qualitative research is philosophically, but how do we actually gather this data in the real world?
You have to talk to people.
The primary tool is talking. But as the source material makes incredibly clear, not all talking is created equal.
Not at all.
We're going to look at the two heavyweights, in-depth interviews versus focus group discussions.
And before we pit them against each other, let's look at the DNA they share. What makes qualitative interviewing fundamentally different from, say, a census poll?
Let's look at the methodologies. Questions 1 and 7 cover this. The main methods used in qualitative research include in-depth interviews, focus group discussions, and participant observation. But what method is explicitly excluded?
Structured questionnaire-based interviews. They are not qualitative.
And understand why, we look at what in-depth interviews and focus groups actually use instead. What kind of tool do they rely on?
They rely on a flexible interview guide.
A flexible interview guide versus a structured questionnaire. This is a crucial distinction.
It's everything.
Anyone who's ever been forced to fill out a customer satisfaction survey knows how agonizing a structured questionnaire can be.
Oh, yeah. On a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you enjoy this show?
Well, what if my answers are the 3? But specifically because I love the first half but hate the outro music.
Yeah.
A structured questionnaire doesn't care. It forces human complexity into a pre-existing numerical box.
Because a structured questionnaire is rigid. It's deductive. The researcher has already decided, before they even met you, what questions are important and in what exact order they must be asked.
Leaves no room for the unexpected.
It's an interrogation, really, not a conversation.
But a flexible interview guide, the hallmark of qualitative research, operates completely differently. How would you describe a flexible guide in practice?
It's more like a topographic map with a few major landmarks circled. You know you need to talk about topic A, topic B, and topic C by the end of the session. But the route you take to navigate between those landmarks, that depends entirely on the terrain of the participant's mind.
Give me a real-world example.
Let's say your landmark is to discuss barriers to exercise with a patient recovering from heart surgery.
Right.
A structured questionnaire asks, do you exercise? Yes or no? If no, is it because of A, time, B, cost, or C, pain?
Pick one.
Exactly.
That flexibility is where the real aha moments happen. In qualitative research, the participants' tangents are often your most valuable data.
Without a doubt.
Okay, so flexibility is the rule of engagement. Now let's master the first major specific tool, the in-depth interview, or IDI. We have a massive cluster of scenarios here, questions 4, 12, 18, 25, and 26.
Let's build the profile.
Let's do it. If a researcher conducts an open-ended one-to-one interview specifically to discover the interviewee's own framework of meanings, what are they doing?
That is the exact definition of an in-depth interview.
And we look at what an IDI is not. What is a feature that completely violates the rules of an in-depth interview?
It cannot involve 2 or more participants at a time.
So, absolute isolation. One researcher, one participant. Let's explore why that boundary is so strictly enforced. Why is it so critical that nobody else is in the room?
Because you're trying to map their unique framework of meanings. You want to know how they make sense of the world untainted by peer pressure or social expectations or, the influence of a spouse or a boss sitting next to them.
Because human beings are chameleons.
Exactly. We change our answers based on who is listening.
Which perfectly sets up question 12. Let's say a researcher needs to collect information regarding highly sensitive matters. The classic example in the notes is alcohol use. What is the absolute best research method suited for this?
The in-depth interview is the only tool for that job.
Let's unpack the psychology of that. If you are researching severe alcohol dependency, or maybe experiences of domestic violence, or a highly stigmatized infectious disease.
Are you going to honestly discuss those deeply painful, socially dangerous realities in a room full of your neighbors?
Of course not.
People will perform. They will lie by omission to protect themselves. Sensitive topics require absolute safety.
They require privacy, confidentiality, and that slow rapport building that only a one-on-one researcher can provide.
Over a period of hours, usually.
Here is where the terminology gets really interesting. Question 26. If we look at the core advantages of conducting an in-depth interview, what specific perspective does it allow us to capture?
It expresses the emic perspective, spelled E-M-I-C, emic.
Emic. This is a massive concept in anthropology. Break down emic versus inic for us.
They are twin concepts. The The emic perspective with a T is the outsider's perspective. It is the researcher's objective clinical observation of a phenomenon from the outside looking in.
Okay.
The emic perspective with an M is the insider's perspective. It is how the culture or the individual patient understands and explains their own reality.
So let's go back to the broken arm x-ray. The emic perspective is the orthopedic surgeon looking at the film and saying, there is a transverse fracture of the distal radius. That's the objective outsider truth.
Yes.
But the emic perspective is the patient sitting there saying, I feel like my entire identity is shattered because I'm a concert pianist and I don't know if I'll ever play again.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. The surgeon's emic view doesn't capture the piano. The IDI is specifically designed to capture that emic insider perspective in all its rich, highly contextualized emotional glory. You want to know what the disease means to the person, not just what it does to their cells.
It's beautiful, really. But there is a massive catch. A trap that the notes explicitly warn against in question 18. When reviewing statements about in-depth interviews, what is a fundamentally incorrect statement that researchers often believe?
The incorrect assumption is that the findings from an IDI are always generalizable.
We have to keep circling back to this because it is the most fatal flaw in novice qualitative research. Generalizability.
It really is.
If I sit down and do a masterful, emotionally raw, 4-hour in-depth interview with that concert pianist about their broken arm, I will have profound world-class emic insights about identity loss.
Yes, you will.
But I cannot write a paper stating, therefore, all people with broken arms experience a total loss of identity.
Because you only spoke to a pianist. If you interviewed a professional soccer player with a broken arm, their emic perspective might be, it's annoying, but my legs are fine. I can still run drills.
So true.
Your findings are deeply, profoundly true for that one specific individual, but they are not statistically generalizable to the broader population. You are sacrificing breadth in order to achieve massive depth.
Okay, so that is the in-depth interview. It's a sniper rifle.
Yeah.
One-on-one, deep, highly sensitive, capturing the emic perspective, but entirely non-generalizable.
That's the IDI in a nutshell.
Now let's put away the sniper rifle and bring in the crowds. Let's talk about focus group discussions, or FGDs. This is a huge chunk of our questions. 15, 16, 19, 27, 29, and 5.
This is a completely different psychological dynamic.
Let's start with the core definition. If a researcher wants to conduct open-ended group interviews that specifically promote discussion among the participants, what are they doing?
They are running a focus group discussion.
And the notes give us a fantastic real-world scenario for this in question 16. Imagine a researcher decides to conduct a study to explore child feeding practices among mothers of children under 5 years old in a specific community.
Okay.
They want to gather a wide range of information on this topic in a relatively short span of time. What qualitative technique is best?
The focus group discussion.
Let's look at the key phrases there. Promotes discussion among participants and gather a wide range of information in a short span of time. How does the dynamic of an FGD differ from an IDI?
In an IDI, the energy flows back and forth on a single string between the researcher and the participant.
Right.
But in a focus group, the researcher steps back and acts more like a moderator or a conductor. The magic of a focus group happens when the participants stop talking to the researcher and start talking to each other.
Put us in that room of mothers discussing child feeding practices. What does that actually look like?
Okay, you get 8 mothers in a circle. The moderator asks a broad question. What is the biggest challenge feeding your toddlers? One mother says, my child absolutely refuses to eat spinach.
Now, in an IDI, the researcher would probe that one mother.
Right, but in a focus group, the magic sparks. Another mother chimes in, oh, I had that exact same problem, but my grandmother taught me to mash the spinach into the potatoes.
Oh, nice.
Then a third mother says, wait, my culture says you shouldn't give potatoes to a child that young. And suddenly, you have a vibrant, dynamic debate about cultural norms, multi-generational advice, and practical tips, all naturally unfolding.
And it is incredibly efficient. Think about the time saved. Instead of conducting 10 separate hour-long IDIs, you get 10 mothers in a room for 90 minutes, and you get a massive brainstorm.
It is efficient. But, and this is perhaps the biggest but, in qualitative research, you have to choose the exact right topic for a focus group.
Which brings us to a critical true or false scenario in question 27. True or false? In a focus group discussion, it is easy to obtain personal behaviors on a sensitive issue.
False. Absolutely, dangerously false.
We touched on this with IDIs and alcohol use. Why do focus groups fail so spectacularly at sensitive issues?
Because a focus group is a public performance. When human beings are in a group, our dominant instinct is social preservation.
To save face.
Exactly. If you ask a room of 8 mothers who here struggles with postpartum depression and feels resentment toward their child, you are going to get dead silence.
Even if some of them are.
Even if 3 of them are suffering deeply, they will not admit it because they fear the judgment of the group. They will say what is socially acceptable, not what is true.
You use focus groups for social norms, community practices, and shared opinions. You never use them for deep, dark secrets.
Never.
Now, if we're building this focus group to discuss norms, who exactly gets an invitation? There's a major trap here in question 19. When evaluating statements about focus group discussions, what is a fundamentally false assumption about group composition?
The false assumption is that heterogeneity of the group is a prerequisite.
Heterogeneity, meaning a highly diverse mixed group. Why is that a false prerequisite? I mean, diversity of thought is a good thing, right?
You'd think so.
Novice researchers always think, I want a 360-degree view of the problem. So if I'm studying hospital safety protocols, I should put the chief executive of the hospital, the senior attending surgeons, the first-year nurses, and the janitorial staff all in the exact same focus group to get a diverse debate going.
If you do that, you will destroy your study. Just imagine the paralyzing awkwardness of that room.
The power dynamics would be terrifying.
They would. Are the young nurses really going to speak up and criticize the safety protocols with the hospital CEO sitting 2 feet away staring at them?
Definitely not.
Is the janitorial staff going to feel empowered to interrupt a senior surgeon? No. They will clam up out of fear for their jobs. The power dynamics will completely silence the marginalized voices.
So the false statement says heterogeneity is required. The reality is the exact opposite.
For a successful focus group, you want homogeneity.
You want similarity.
You want people who share a similar background, social status, or relationship to the topic, so they feel a sense of peer-to-peer safety. You put all the young nurses in one focus group. You put the senior surgeons in a totally separate focus group. That is how you get honest discussion.
But even with a perfectly homogeneous group dynamics are still incredibly tricky, which leads to a major vulnerability tested in question 29. True or false? Data obtained from a focus group discussion may be sensitive to biased analysis.
True. It is highly vulnerable to bias.
How does that bias creep in?
Think about every group project you ever participated in during school, or every committee meeting you've sat through. There's always one dominant personality.
Oh, absolutely. The loud guy, the person who just steamrolls the conversation. I'm self-aware enough to admit I might have been the loud guy once or twice.
Well, we've all been there. But in a focus group, if the moderator is passive or unskilled, the loud guy can completely hijack the narrative.
They answer every question first.
They talk over people. They aggressively state their opinions as fact. Now, if you just read the typed transcript later, it might look like the group enthusiastically agreed that the new health policy is terrible.
But in reality?
In reality, 7 people were quietly ambivalent, and one dominant personality just wouldn't shut up. If you analyze that transcript without reading the room, your analysis is biased.
You have to analyze the silences just as much as the words. That makes total sense. Now, speaking of transcripts, there is one last crucial administrative detail regarding focus groups in question 5. When it comes to making audio recordings during focus group discussions, what is the strict rule?
Audio recording can only be done with explicit prior informed consent.
This might seem like a boring administrative checkbox, but it's actually the ethical bedrock of the entire field, isn't it?
It is paramount. In qualitative research, you are not just taking someone's blood pressure. You are capturing their exact words, their voice, their personal stories. You are extracting their lived reality.
You can't just sneakily record them.
You cannot secretly hit record on your phone in the middle of a village square. You must clearly explain what you are doing, why you are recording, how the data will be protected, and you must have their explicit consent before the conversation begins.
Because secretly recording people is the fastest way to destroy trust.
And in qualitative research, trust is your only currency.
If they don't trust you, they won't give you their emic perspective. All right, that wraps up section 2 beautifully. We have the in-depth interview for private, deep dives into sensitive territory, and we have the focus group for fast, dynamic group brainstorming on norms.
2 very different tools governed by very different social psychologies.
But both tools still share one critical limitation, which leads us perfectly into section 3, immersion and convergence.
The next step.
Right, so we've mastered interviews and focus groups. But both of those methods rely entirely on what people say they do. And as anyone who studies human behavior knows, what people say they do and what they actually do are often two entirely different realities.
Human beings are notoriously unreliable narrators of our own lives. We aren't even necessarily lying maliciously, we just forget things. We rationalize our bad habits.
Or we suffer from social desirability bias, where we subconsciously try to look like a good patient for the researcher.
Exactly. If you ask a patient, do you take your medication every day at 8 a.m., they will almost always say yes because they know they're supposed to.
But if you actually watch them in their house, you might see they forget it 3 days a week. So what if we don't want to rely on their words? What if we want to bypass the interview and actually see their behavior in the wild?
We have to transition from talking to observing.
Specifically, we move to participant observation. And Dr. Shah really wants us to grasp this concept because the notes hit the same fundamental definition 3 times from slightly different angles.
Yeah?
Questions 8, 14, and 28. Let's rapid fire the core concept.
Let's break it down.
Scenario 1, question 8. If we are looking for the method of qualitative study where the observer physically becomes a part of the group or event, what is it?
Participant observation.
Scenario 2, questions 14 and 28. When evaluating statements regarding participant observation, what is the defining truth of the method?
The observer becomes a part of the event or group.
And just to hammer it home one more time, what is definitively true regarding the participant observation method?
The researcher himself becomes a part of the study group.
Okay, we get the point. Immersion is the defining feature. But let's actually visualize what that means, because it sounds like you're just going undercover. You don't just sit in a lab coat with a clipboard on the edge of the room watching people like zoo animals.
No, you get in the mud with them.
Walk me through that.
Let's use the emergency room example again. If you want to study the unspoken cultural dynamics of a trauma ward, like how nurses communicate with doctors during a crisis, you don't just interview them in a quiet office later.
You go to the ER.
You spend 6 months embedded in that ER. You wear scrubs. You fetch supplies. You work alongside them, experiencing the 3 a.m. exhaustion, the adrenaline, the chaos. You become a fixture in their environment until they forget you are a researcher and start acting completely naturally.
You become an insider to witness the insider reality. It sounds like the ultimate way to get unvarnished truth, but that level of immersion comes with a massive logistical nightmare.
It's so hard.
If we look at statements regarding participant observation in question 9, what is the one claim that is absolutely false?
The false claim is that systematic collection of data is easy.
Why is it so incredibly difficult? If I'm right there in the room watching it happen, shouldn't gathering data be simple?
Because you are trying to do 2 psychologically contradictory things at the exact same time. You are trying to actively, authentically participate in the messy reality of the group, and simultaneously you are trying to maintain the detached, objective brain of a data collector.
I picture it like this. Imagine you're an anthropologist researching the cultural dynamics of a chaotic, fast-paced, incredibly loud community festival.
Okay.
It's nighttime, there are bonfires, people are dancing, you're eating the local food, you're part of the ritual. Now, while you are dancing, try to simultaneously fill out a highly structured, multi-column Excel spreadsheet about the frequency of specific eye contact interactions between the elders.
It's impossible.
They'll trip into the bonfire.
You would. It is practically impossible to pull out a clipboard in the middle of a ritual or the middle of an ER trauma without completely destroying the natural environment you were trying to study.
So systematic data collection is not easy.
Not at all. Instead, participant observers often have to rely on jottings, like hiding in a bathroom to scribble 3 quick keywords in a pocket notebook. And then they have to stay awake for 4 hours every night writing out massive, detailed field notes strictly from memory.
It sounds exhausting.
Wow.
Messy, cognitively draining work.
It is. But the payoff is that you bypass the unreliable narrator. You see the truth.
Just to quickly clean up the data collection tools mentioned in this section, we have questions 24 asking us to identify an outlier. We're given a list: interviews, participant observation, focus group discussion, and sociogram. Which of these is not a primary data collection method used in qualitative research?
The odd one out is the sociogram.
Now, we've spent this entire deep dive establishing interviews, focus groups, and participant observation as the holy trinity of qualitative data collection. But what exactly is a sociogram and why doesn't it fit?
A sociogram is essentially a visual map of social relationships within a group. It looks like a spider web.
Oh, like drawing lines between people.
Exactly. It maps out who is friends with who communicates with who is the isolated outcast. While a qualitative researcher might use a sociogram as a supplementary charting technique to visualize their findings, it is not a primary methodology for gathering deep narrative data.
It's a diagram, not a qualitative interview. Okay, so we have our qualitative tools defined. But what if we want the best of both worlds? What if we want the hard, undeniable mathematics of the X-ray and the deep, emotional imic perspective of the patient's story?
This is where modern research gets incredibly powerful.
Let's look at a complex scenario regarding convergence in question 23. A researcher wants to estimate the prevalence of exclusive breastfeeding in a remote tribal population. However, she also wants to deeply understand the cultural myths and taboos associated with breastfeeding in that specific community. Which approach must be employed in this dual-goal scenario?
She must use a mixed method study.
Let's break down the anatomy of that prompt, because it perfectly illustrates the two halves of the scientific brain at work. The first goal is explicit. Estimate the prevalence.
And we know from Section 1 that qualitative research absolutely cannot do this.
Right. If she wants a prevalence rate, she has to run a quantitative, statistically representative survey. She needs the math.
But her second goal is to understand the myths and taboos. You cannot put a myth into a calculator. A survey asking, do you believe in taboo A or taboo B, will fail to capture the nuance.
For that, she needs qualitative tools, in-depth interviews with grandmothers, or focus groups with young mothers.
Therefore, you mix the methods. They operate in a symbiotic loop. You run the quantitative survey and discover the hard fact. Only 30% of mothers are exclusively breastfeeding. That tells you what the problem is.
Then you deploy the qualitative interviews to discover why. And maybe you uncover a deeply held ancient belief that colostrum, the first milk, is impure and must be discarded.
The quantitative numbers tell you where the fire is burning. The qualitative stories tell you what kind of fuel is feeding it, so you know how to put it out.
It's the ultimate 1-2 punch. And when you combine these different angles, you arrive at the ultimate research superpower, which is the subject of question 20. True or false? Triangulation is the use of multiple methods, multiple theories, and multiple sources for a comprehensive understanding of the topic in question.
That is absolutely true. That is the definition of triangulation.
Triangulation, it's a term originally borrowed from navigation and surveying, right?
Exactly. Imagine you're lost deep in the woods. If you can only see one landmark, say a single mountain peak, you only have a vague general idea of where you are. You have a single line of sight.
Right.
But if you can see 3 different landmarks, the mountain, a river bend, and a radio tower, you can draw intersecting lines from all 3 points on your map. Where those 3 lines intersect is your exact undeniable location.
It's exactly how the GPS in our phones works. One satellite just knows you are somewhere on a massive 500-mile circle on Earth. But if 3 or 4 satellites intersect their signals, they can tell you exactly which coffee shop you're standing in.
That's it, exactly. In research, every methodology has a blind spot. If you only use a quantitative survey, you might have a rigid, superficial view of the problem.
And if you only use qualitative focus groups, you might have a biased view dominated by loud personalities.
But if you triangulate, if you use a massive quantitative survey and you conduct deep, qualitative, in-depth interviews and you embed yourself for participant observation, and all 3 of those totally different methods point to the exact same conclusion,
then your confidence in that finding absolutely skyrockets. You aren't just guessing anymore. You have a truly comprehensive, multidimensional understanding of the truth.
you've eliminated the blind spots.
You've successfully navigated the muddy waters. Which brings us to our final hurdle, Section 4, decoding the matrix, qualitative data analysis.
The hardest part.
Okay, so you've done the fieldwork. You've conducted 50 in-depth interviews. You've survived the physical exhaustion of participant observation. You've triangulated your methods. Now the fieldwork is over. You were sitting at your desk and you were staring at 500 pages of messy, typed-up transcripts of people just talking endlessly about their lives.
It is, without a doubt, the most overwhelming, paralyzing moment for any qualitative researcher. A quantitative researcher just hits run on their statistical software and gets a p-value. A qualitative researcher has to read 500,000 words of human emotion and somehow make scientific sense of it.
How do you analyze this mountain of text without losing your mind? We have a final set of core concepts that address the analytical approach. Let's look at a very specific, incredibly famous method in qualitative research found in questions 3 and 30.
Grounded theory.
Yes. If we're looking for the qualitative data analysis method in which investigators code text into categories and build theoretical models, what is it called?
That is known as grounded theory.
And another scenario in the notes defines it from a slightly different angle. The analytical approach, where the researcher proceeds to develop a theory based strictly on learnings obtained directly from the data, is called what?
Grounded theory analysis.
Grounded theory. The key phrases in both of those definitions are build or develop a theory based on the data.
Which links us right back to our paradigm shift in Section 1.
Right.
This is the ultimate expression of inductive reasoning.
A blank slate detective.
Exactly. In grounded theory, you aggressively refuse to start with a pre-existing theory. You do not force your messy human data into neat pre-existing academic boxes. You literally sit down with page 1 of your 500-page transcript, and you just start reading line by line. You start coding the text.
Walk me through what coding actually looks like. It sounds like computer programming.
It's much more organic than that. It's essentially highlighting. You read a sentence where a patient says, "I didn't go to the doctor because my boss would fire me for taking Tuesday off." You highlight that and write a code in the margin. Fear of job loss.
Okay.
Then you read another transcript where someone says, "I can't afford the bus fare to the clinic." You code that. Financial barrier. You do this thousands of times. Gradually, as you swim through the data, these individual codes start to clump together into broader categories.
So fear of job loss and bus fare combine into a larger category called economic paralysis.
Yes. Then you look at how economic paralysis relates to medical distrust. You literally let the theory grow organically out of the raw text.
The final theory is, quite literally, grounded in the dirt of the data. It wasn't imported from a textbook. It grew from the voices of the participants.
It is incredibly rigorous, but it takes an immense amount of time and patience.
But that is not the only way to analyze text. Sometimes we don't need to reinvent the wheel, which introduces the alternative approach in question 10. What is the qualitative data analysis method, which explicitly uses a pre-existing theoretical framework as the basis for its analysis?
That is called content analysis.
Content analysis. So this is slightly more rigid. It leans back toward deductive reasoning.
Yeah.
In this approach, you do have a pre-existing theory before you start reading the transcripts.
Right. It's like you bring an architectural blueprint to the construction site. You already know exactly what kind of rooms you are looking to build.
Let's say I'm using content analysis to study transcripts of patient complaints at a hospital, and I'm basing my study on a very specific pre-existing academic theory of doctor-patient communication failures. I'm not reading the transcripts looking for brand new theories. I'm specifically scanning the text with a highlighter, looking for examples of lack of empathy or jargon confusion, because those are the categories my blueprint tells me to look for.
Exactly. You are categorizing the content based on the framework you brought with you. With grounded theory, you build the house from scratch without a blueprint, just seeing what materials you find in the transcripts. With content analysis, you bring the blueprint and sort the materials to fit the rooms.
Both are entirely valid, powerful methods, but they serve different purposes depending on how much is already scientifically known about the topic. Wow, we did it. We have navigated the entire landscape of Lecture 9. Let's zoom out for a second and appreciate what we've covered. You, the listener, just mentally worked your way through 30 dense, complex academic scenarios regarding qualitative methodology. But more importantly, you didn't do it by rote memorization.
No, you engaged with the underlying logic. You didn't just learn the definitions, you learned the philosophy.
You understand the soul of qualitative research. You know that it proudly embraces subjectivity to capture credibility. You know it uses inductive reasoning to build theories from the ground up, rather than forcing deductions from the top down.
And you understand the specific tactical deployment of the arsenal.
Right. In-depth interviews are your private sanctuary for sensitive emic secrets. Focus groups are your dynamic arenas for uncovering community norms. Participant observation is your messy, exhausting immersion into unvarnished reality.
You also learn the absolute boundaries. You know you can never use these tools to find a prevalence rate or a disease burden.
But you know that if you mix them with quantitative math, you can triangulate the ultimate truth. And finally, you know how to build a conceptual model organically using grounded theory, or map it to a blueprint using content analysis.
It is a fundamentally different way of looking at the world than the hard sciences. It requires deep empathy, immense patience, and a high tolerance for ambiguity.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over. We spent this entire time talking about researchers and participants and methodologies as if this only happens in a sterile university setting or a remote field clinic. But think about your own daily life.
Think about your interactions at work, the dynamics in your family, or even how you process information when you were just scrolling through the news.
How often do you jump straight to estimating the burden? How often do we approach our daily lives with a rigidly quantitative mindset? We focus purely on the metrics, the performance reviews, the test scores, the bank account balances, the polling numbers.
How often do we make massive judgments about our teams, our children, or our society based entirely on the spreadsheet?
And how often do we completely fail to solve the underlying problem because we skipped the qualitative step?
It happens all the time.
Exactly. The next time you face a complex human problem, whether it is a suddenly struggling team member at work who is missing deadlines, a recurring miscommunication with your partner, or trying to understand a massive cultural shift in your community, stop and ask yourself, do I just need more numbers? Do I just need to send them another structured questionnaire?
Or do I need to sit down, throw out my pre-existing theories, and conduct an in-depth interview to truly understand their emic perspective?
Do I need to look closer at the narrative instead of the data points?
Because sometimes the X-ray machine doesn't show you where the real pain is. You have to be willing to sit in the muddy waters and listen.
Boom. That's it. Beautifully said. Keep questioning the data, keep looking for the messy human story behind the pristine numbers, and as always, enjoy the deep dive. Catch you next time.